So we'll just kick off from where we left off, which was chapter 3, verse 19. So continuing with this theme of action, okay, without attachment to the fruit. Fruit meaning without sort of thinking about what am I going to get out of this. We simply do an action because it's one's duty to do so, and not with any consideration of what one's going to get back from the action. So verse 39. Therefore you must always perform your duty. No need to run off to the forest. Always perform your duty, but without attachment. For by acting without attachment, one attains the supreme. It's desire that has to be given up. In any instance, even if one goes to the forest, one has to give up desire. But one doesn't need to go to the forest or engage in inaction yoga if one can give up the desire for some return. Desire meaning my body, mind is going to experience something pleasant from an action. So that's why the yogi always has to be keeping in mind, I'm not the body, mind. Otherwise, it's natural one's going to start slipping into a place where if one thinks one's body, mind, then one's going to act in the world in ways that feel good to the body, mind. It's perfectly logical and natural. So karma yoga or any kind of yoga cannot at all be performed successfully unless one is rigorously keeping this wisdom, this idea, this notion, which initially is a mental state, right? To say I am an Atman is just sort of a mental story one tells oneself, but to say I am anything is a mental story. So the Jnāna Yoga is urging us to cultivate a mental story, a deep contemplation on what Jnāna Yoga would say is our reality, which is that we're non-material. Ultimately, at our deepest core, we're Atman, we're non-material. And of course, then offering the possibility that it won't always remain a story. At some point, one will be able to experience that Atman in its own right. All the yoga traditions are clear about that. The beginning, it's faith. We have faith in the story, the faith in this sort of mindset that one is cultivating. But in time, the mind becomes more and more sattvic. So there's all of these beneficial material side effects. One becomes peaceful, one becomes happy, one begins to see the sameness. Now, this is not just a story. This becomes a perception, the sameness of all beings, from which comes compassion, because when you see that all beings are the same, then, well, actually empathy first. When we see that being is me, I'm the same, how would I feel if I was in that situation? And that gets applied to animals as well. So from empathy then comes compassion. Compassion is the ability to see oneself in others. So all of this is not the ultimate goal of yoga. But as the mind becomes freer of desire, it becomes more sattvic. The lens, the way that the mind is just a lens, remember, one has no direct access to reality. As the lens of the mind changes, one actually perceives reality differently. So that's something that is very quickly realizable when one takes to the yogic path. So when one starts to get those kinds of realizations and experiences, then that fortifies one's faith. There is a grand finale, of course, beyond all of that, beyond all mental states, and that's an experience of the Atman in its own nature. So that's verse 19. And now, remember, Arjuna is a warrior, so Krishna wants to encourage him by making connections with his forefathers to give him some kind of a sense of security that what he's doing is not brand new. So he says, by action alone, King Janaka, that's the father of Sita in the Ramayana, he's also in he's actually there in the Upanishads. You see the footnote. He's the ruler of Videha. Anyway, famous king. So well known. That's the point. So by action alone, King Janaka and others attained perfection. They didn't renounce the world. Considering the welfare of all beings, you must perform your prescribed duties. It may be the case that an enlightened being doesn't need to act. But if the enlightened being doesn't need to act, then by the same token, the enlightened being doesn't need to not act. If you're really not attached, then it doesn't matter which way you go. So therefore, Krishna says, for the welfare of others, not for yourself. Enlightened being has nothing to accomplish, but for the welfare of others, act. And here's a famous verse, 21. Whatever action is performed by a great person, all of mankind follows. People follow leaders, right? Whether they're sports stars or music icons or political personalities, it's our nature to follow look up to great beings. So whatever example such a person sets, a great being, the whole world pursues. So then we'll skip the next few verses. Krishna says, even I have to work. I don't have to, but even I work. So that's the next 5 verses you can read, and we'll jump to 27. In all respects, actions are carried out by the gunas, the qualities. When it's written here, qualities of material nature, if you look over on the left, the Sanskrit is the gunas. So really what's acting? This body is made of the gunas, the mind is made of the gunas, the world is made of the gunas. So what is actually going on when we act? It's the gunas acting in the gunas. The body and the senses of the body, right? Perceiving things, touching things, the working senses, moving in the world, picking things up, seeing things, hearing things, right? Functioning in the world is really actually, because the Atman's not doing anything other than providing consciousness. And although this doesn't get worked out very thoroughly in the Gita, but he's also the agent. Somehow or other, there is free will in the Atman. It's given all of it needs equipment to be able to express this free will. This is the Vedanta position, not the Sankhya position, but we won't get into that debate. But actually, myself and one of your predecessors at Rutgers, a student who was at Rutgers, is now professor of philosophy at Bridgewater State University. We put together an edited volume called Free Will and Agency in Indian Philosophy. Where is free will located? Is it in the Atman? Is it in the mind? Where is it? We had scholars from, 12, 13, 14 different schools contribute an article on free will, specifically focused on free will, from the different schools. And I had to do the one on Sankhya. Sankhya situates free will in the mind. But anyway, that's this topic for another day or for another time. It's more of an advanced topic. But so the Atman is providing consciousness, but also volition, free will in some sort of way, according to Vedanta. But otherwise, verse 27, in all other respects, actions are carried out by the qualities of the gunas. But the soul, deluded by ego, thinks, I am the doer. I wouldn't quite translate it quite like that. I would say the mind is deluded by ego. The soul can never be deluded. Consciousness is always pure consciousness. But nonetheless, the point is, in delusion, our minds, when they're deluded, think that the mind thinks that it is the doer. We're really, everything is just the gunas, acting in the gunas. But the learned person, a great armed one, who knows the distinction between the qualities of material nature and action, and who understands the senses are simply interacting with sense objects, is not attached. The soul is not actually doing anything. The senses are engaging with the sense objects. But although, in one way though, the mind is making decisions. So the mind is actually the agent in some ways, at least. When it's under, at least according to Sankhya, we can put it that way. Whereas Vedanta would say the Atman is the ultimate agent, but it can do nothing without instruments. So it needs instruments, even of cognition, even to think about how to channel its free will. It needs the instruments of cognition, the intelligence, and so forth. Anyway, this is the tricky point, this idea of free will, and we don't really have enough time to. It doesn't get developed in Indian philosophy as much as it does in other traditions. It doesn't seem to have been an issue that Indian intellectuals engaged very carefully, very thoroughly. Engaged many other things. Right? All different philosophical traditions, they sort of feature, they get caught up in particular issues. But this is one issue that Indian thinkers did not really sort of engage very extensively. They did engage it, though. The location of free will. I don't want to get sidetracked by that. 29. Those who are bewildered by the qualities of material nature, the gunas, are attached to the actions induced by these qualities. We can become attached to our actions. right? We have goals, we have ambitions, and we act, and we become attached to that. However, we identify with that. However, those whose knowledge is complete, who know, no, I'm an Atman. I'm actually transcendent to all of that and beyond all of that. But the point he's making in this verse, those whose knowledge is complete should not disturb the foolish whose knowledge is incomplete. You can't sort of start preaching high-level Vedanta to those who are not ready to hear that are like completely identified with body-mind. Better you just advise them to act with attachment, but at least try to be dharmic. People don't want to hear, that you don't be attached to your actions and don't give up desire. If a person's not ready to hear that, then next best thing is, well, okay, at least encourage people to act dharmically. So anyway, all he's saying in this verse is it shouldn't confuse people that are not ready to hear the Vedanta teachings. Eventually, maybe they'll become ready, and that's fine. Then you can share this. So that seems to be the import of 29. 30. Dedicate all your actions to me. Now, this is a bhakti message. We're going to get a lot more bhakti later on in the text. Fix your mind on the Supreme. Give up this affliction, and without desire or egotism, fight. Give up this sort of affliction that, Bhishma and Drona are going to die. Realize you have to do your duty, and the soul is eternal, no one's going to die. And if it's a battle, in the course of righteous warfare, of course people die. But that should not dissuade one from one's dharma. Fight, he ends up saying. 30. 31. Those who follow my eternal teachings, because Krishna is going to say, remember, he will say in the next chapter, beginning of the next chapter, I imparted this, the beginning of creation. And according to Indian traditions, you remember the Mimamsas, the Vedas are eternal, but even the other schools who believe in the cyclical creation, early Mimamsa didn't believe in that, although eventually it did. But the same teachings are revealed at the beginning of every cosmic cycle. Those who believe in cosmic cycles would say. Ishvara re-articulates them. Those who follow my eternal teachings with full faith, without envy, are freed from the bondage of action. Right? Bondage, the law of cause and effect, applies if one acts with desire. Then whatever action one performs generates its corresponding reaction. But if there's no desire, then there's no reaction. On the contrary, one acts without desire, then the reaction to that is not the regular cause and effect reaction. I mean, there is an effect, but it's not the regular as you sow, so you shall seed, so to speak, as the Bible puts it. But to use biblical language, although of course the Bible doesn't espouse the law of karma, but the reaction is that the seeds of karma are burnt. They're not generated, they're burnt. So there is an effect, because every action has an effect. But the effect of karma yoga, of acting without desire, the effect of that is that all the seeds are burnt, not just the present act, the seeds of the present act, but other seeds as well, according to the Gita. But those who out of envy, 32, fail to follow my teachings, presumably this means envy of God, some kind of sort of aversion to God, are bereft of knowledge. Knowledge meaning knowledge of the Atman. They remain trapped in this idea that I'm body-mind, and they act on that from that point of view. Know them to be lost and without sensitivity. They're lost to their Atmans. So, achetasaha, I don't know why he's translated that as without sensitivity, but yeah, perhaps, without sensitivity to higher truths. 33, all beings follow their nature. We're trapped in a certain body-mind combination, and that causes us to act in different ways. Some of us are activists, some of us are teachers, some of us are sort of have an inclination to business, others have inclination towards artistic activities, and an infinite number of things, but which correspond, which sort of suits our nature. So all beings follow their own nature, this prakritic nature. Remember, the Atmans are all the same. It's not that one Atman has a nature and another one has another nature. No, it's the bodies and minds that are different. Therefore, even persons of learning act according to their nature. Right? If you're a scholar, you like to person of learning, you love to read and study and engage intellectual questions and so forth. What can suppression accomplish? Well, what's the point of suppressing the nature? Right? That's as the yogis in the forest do us. But the Karma Yoga teachings are saying, engage that nature, but, remember the big huge but, engage it without attachment to the fruits. Passion and hatred. And here we have our Raga Dvesha, the kleshas of Patanjali. Raga Dvesha. Look over the Sanskrit, second cluster of words. Raga and Dveshas rest in each of the senses along with the sense objects, right? So we have things we like to see and things we don't like to see. We have sounds we like to hear and sounds we don't like to hear. Tastes that we appreciate, tastes that we don't appreciate. So these are just the senses and the sense objects. One must not come under their control. A wise person does not become trapped by the demands of the senses. On the contrary, freedom, from the point of view of the Gita, is to control the senses, not to be controlled by them. Right? So that's a type of loss of freedom. If our desires are controlling us, right, we think they're us, so we think that I'm free to pursue my desires. That's what freedom is if one is in ignorance of the self. Then the notion of freedom is freedom to pursue the desires, but if one understands that their self is something else, then all of a sudden desires are not in the self. They're situated in the body-mind, which is not the real self. Then all of a sudden, then freedom means to become freed from this imposition of something, right? Something outside of the self. If you think of political freedom, for example, it's to break the control of something external to oneself, some other kind of political power, right? Any kind of freedom is freedom from something outside of oneself that's imposing power on oneself, right? So whether it's personal freedom or gender equality, whatever it might be, it's resisting power from outside. Well, if one understands that the real self is the Atman, then all of a sudden body-mind are outside selves, they're external selves, and they are demanding. They're demanding attention, right? Feed me, indulge me, buy me this, buy me that. So that all of a sudden that becomes power being exerted on the real self. So then freedom is to control that. So think about it. It's a whole different paradigm, a whole different way of thinking about self. Foot 35. Better to perform one's own duty imperfectly than to perform another's duty perfectly. One should find out what is one's dharma, which is a tricky question, but what is one best suited to do? What comes most comfortably and naturally? What does the body mind, what have we always wanted to do? Maybe some other dharma like making money, or, my parents want us to get a good job doing this, that, and the other, being engineers or doctors or something like that, computer engineers. You'll make good money, beta, Anna. Whatever it might be, we all have a sort of, it's fairly common. And, well-meaning, of course, obviously well-meaning parents, they want their children to be safe and protected in the world. They want them to get good jobs. But if that's not one's dharma, one's never going to be satisfied. This verse says, better you do your own dharma. What is it you've always wanted to do? Because back in ancient India, that probably was the dharma of your family, so it was quite easy that you just assumed that you took birth in a particular family, that was your karma, and you took up the occupation of the family. That would be the expectation. But in our day and age, of course, we have so many options, and children don't necessarily, in all instances, at least not in the modern, urban landscape, don't necessarily follow the professions of their parents. So then how do you find your dharma? Well, ultimately your dharma corresponds to your actual nature of something. Dharma means a property. Remember, in Nyaya Vaisheshika, substances have certain properties. So the sun has the property of heat and light. Is its property. Just that's what it is. That's what makes up its nature as a distinct entity. So in the ideal world, we have an ideal properties that, our way of thinking, the type of body that we have lends itself best to a particular type of action in the world. That's our dharma. And it's better to do that imperfectly. We might never be rich or whatever it is, but if we're performing our dharma, say you're an artist, you might be a musician or something, you might never make it to the big time, but you don't. If one's doing one's dharma, one's going to be satisfied. So better to do that than to perform another's duty perfectly. then go get a job in the bank and make a lot of money, but not doing one's dharma, one's going to be miserable. So that's the idea. Destruction in the performance of one's own duty is preferable, even if you live a poor life. To follow another's duty invites danger. So then Arjuna asks this great question, 36. O Krishna, descendant of Vrishni, by what force are men drawn to perform evil deeds, even against their will, right? We all have this experience. This sort of force, desire rises in the mind, and there's a part of the same mind that knows this is not good for me. I shouldn't be doing this, right? When we eat too much or behaving in a way that's destructive, or being mean to someone, or whatever it might be. What is it? It's like a force that rises in the mind, a desire. Go to the fridge, eat something. When you know you're not hungry, you don't need it. What's that force? Krishna says, 37, it's desire. It's anger, remember? Anger always follows desire. You go to the fridge, you eat, then you feel disgusted afterwards. You're like, oh, what did I do that for? You feel bloated or whatever it might be. It is desire, it is anger, born from rajas. Word for desire, raga, one of the many words. Rajas come from the same Sanskrit root, raj. Know this to be the all-devouring sinful enemy of the world, not just of the individual, desire. Krishna saw our modern world with all of its environmental calamities and the catastrophe we've reaped on our planet by overconsumption. That's all desire at its core, right? Our whole capitalist economy is built on creating desire. That's what a capitalist economy has to. The only way it can function is to create, is to produce, and which means to. I've said this before, but it's worth saying again and again. To produce, which means there has to be markets, which means markets have to be created. You have to go out and create. That's what advertising is all about. And what is that? What does creating a market mean? Creating desire for something that may be not even beneficial to people. Think of cigarettes. Think of the cigarette industry. You create this image of coolness, or whatever it was back when I was a kid. That now, of course, people don't smoke as much as they used to, but it was all successful advertising. More Brahman. So that's a capitalist economy. So Krishna's saying here, know this to be. This is a really important verse. If we're looking for, how's the Gita relevant to our modern day and age? People might ask that. Well, it's an old text, 2,000 years old, written in Sanskrit. What's that got to do with our present problems? Well, right here, the very base of our problems is overconsumption, which is just another way of saying desire. We're not able to control our desires, or we live in a culture that aggravates desire. That all needs to change. That all needs to change for us to save the planet, and also for us to return to healthy, natural lifestyles. So it's desire. I'll read it again. It is anger, right? Then we become frustrated. Nation states compete with each other for resources, born from the quality of rajas. Know this to be the all-devouring, sinful enemy of this world. So there you have it. I think that's one of the most relevant verses from the Gita that speaks to our modern day. There's many, of course. The entire Gita speaks to all of this is still relevant, perennially relevant. The teachings of the Gita are always relevant, but this verse in particular. So as fire is covered by smoke, so this is desire on sattva, rajas, and tamas. It gets denser and denser, through the three gunas. So fire covered by smoke, the smoke can be blown away. As mirror is covered by dust, it's more solid. It's but you could still blow it away or clean it. And as the embryo is covered by the membrane, that's even more. The embryo is really trapped for, several months. So these are different intensities of being covered by desire. So they give three different metaphors, different stages. So this living being is covered by desire in the mind. O son of Kunti, even the knowledge of a learned person is covered by this eternal enemy in the form of desire. Even one could be a vidwan, but still that desire is so hard to conquer. Remember, from a yoga perspective, we've had infinite births, and all of those past births, not just as humans, but animals, all in ignorance, right? So what do all beings seek? To fulfill desire, whatever that desire is, right? For a tree, it's desire for rain and sun. For An ant is scuttling about looking for a piece of food. It's desire that's activating all living entities. So now we get the human form. If we take up the path of yoga, it's not going to be so easy to conquer this feature of the mind that's pretty much been there since the beginning of time. And that's what's generated reincarnation. So it's even a learned person, then, you might know about the Atman. But even the knowledge of a learned person is covered by the eternal enemy in the form of desire, which burns like an insatiable fire. What does that mean? Fire is never satisfied. It's not the desire. It only goes out if you stop putting fuel in. As long as you put fuel in, then it just burns brighter and brighter and stronger. So as long as we try to gratify the desires, they just get stronger and stronger. They don't just say, "Oh, thank you very much, now I'm satisfied," and leave you alone. No, that's not the nature of. It's like a fire. It consumes more and more and more and more. So 40, the senses, the mind, and the intellect are said to be the resting place of the desire. So the sensual desires for sense experiences, mental desires for emotion, seeking love, in this, through another body-mind combination. We look for love in other creatures. If we don't find it with humans, and we lavish love on pets. This is all misplaced from a yogic point of view. Krishna's going to say, direct your love to me, then it's eternal, then it's fully satisfying, and never frustrate. It's never your partner's not going to leave you. It's never going to be up and down. It's always going to be fulfilling. This is the love of bhakti seeks for, and the Gita is a bhakti text. So, verse number. I just took a break. I can't remember whether we did 40. We'll do it again. If we did, no harm done. So the senses, the mind, and the intellect are said to be the resting place of this desire. Right? Desire is the enemy. We just read. Krishna said, eternal enemy, 39. And verse 37, Vidhi hi enam vaidenam. Know this to be the enemy. That is verse number 37. So the senses, the mind, and the intellect. So the senses desires sense objects. The mind desires emotional, love and affection. It has emotional desires. And the intellect, right? The intellect desires to be stimulated, to read different things, to explore different things. These are all desires in the psychophysical body. So these are the resting place of this desire. Desire is not just exclusively sensual. It can be also emotional. Desire for emotional, where people seek love, and intellectual. It deludes and obscures knowledge of the embodied one, because when consciousness is absorbed in the body, in the mind, and absorbed in the desires which are located in the body-mind, and then seeks to fulfill them, then, or at least the mind seeks to fulfill them, the mind empowered and activated by consciousness, then that's delusion, because one can never find fulfillment in that way, and one is neglecting the real self, the Atman. So 41, therefore, O bull of the Bharatas, named for a warrior bull, in the very beginning, curb the senses and kill this evil one who is the destroyer of both knowledge and wisdom. That's desire. Hey, remember, body-mind desire, nothing wrong with desiring for the Atman. That's Patanjali would call that aklishta, verse number 5 of the Yoga Sutras. So right in the beginning, so don't allow, remember the sequencing that we read last class, contemplating the objects of the senses, then attachment arises, and from attachment, desire, then from desire, frustration. So in the beginning of the process, so someone seriously situated in the yoga path then tries to control the senses at the beginning, then does not allow him or herself to overly contemplate the objects of the senses, because that just ends up creating desire. So here we have a verse 42, a bit like the one in the, the Katha Upanishad, the chariot metaphor. The senses, they say, are exalted. Higher than the senses is the mind. Higher still is the intellect. Beyond the intellect, however, is the soul. Do you remember the chariot? The horses are the senses. The reins are the mind. the driver is the intelligence, and so clearly the same kind of hierarchy in the metaphor of the chariot. 43, O mighty armed Arjuna, knowing the soul to be higher, it's higher, it's subtler, it is more subtle than the other things, and it's ultimate. These other things are temporary and ever-changing. So, and it is who what we really are. These other things are not who we really are. So knowing the soul to be higher than the intellect, you must control the mind through the use of the intelligence. Intelligence has to be situated in the knowledge that there is an Atman that is higher than itself. That is wisdom. Wisdom is a state of the intellect, not a state of the soul. The soul has no states. It's just pure consciousness. So that's a state of the intellect to know I am not the real self. The intellect has to understand that it itself is not the real self. Right? That's wisdom. There's something beyond me the intellect has to understand. The thinking part of us has to understand. Initially we understand it theoretically. But these traditions are giving us practices whereby the consciousness can experience its own nature. And Patanjali is all about that. Chittavritti nirodha tada. Why do we do that? Drashtu surupe vastanam. That consciousness can experience its own nature. Okay? So, O mighty armed Arjuna, knowing the soul to be higher than the intellect, you must control the mind through the use of the intelligence. What does it mean to control the mind? Not allow the mind to drag one here and there in the pursuit of desire. Desire is situated especially in the mind. So it's the mind that churns up all these dreams and ambitions and illusions and desires, and I would be happy if I had this, I would be happy if I had that. These are all illusions. None of that can make us happy. So therefore, so that must be controlled. And slay this enemy in the form of insurmountable desire, right? Durasadam is not quite insurmountable, because it can be surmounted, otherwise why would Krishna be telling Arjuna? So I wouldn't translate Durasadam. It's inaccurate and also philosophically incorrect, because it can be surmounted. So the Sanskrit is Durasadam, which means hard to overcome, not impossible. That's chapter 3. And now Krishna is going to reveal who he is in chapter 4. So begin with Krishna said, in the beginning, now we're talking about aeons earlier, the beginning of creation. Krishna says, I spoke this yoga. Remember what yoga is in the Gita? It's skill in action, right? So make sure you keep your eye on 2, 48, and 50. Now that you might find that those verses are the sort of things we might put on the quiz. Might not, I'm not saying, but wouldn't be surprised. 48, samatvam. All right, we're going to go over 48 and 50, because this is the definition of the Gita that Krishna is teaching. Right? We know that the inaction Gita, there are two types of yoga. Sorry, inaction yoga. Two types of yoga. We know that. We read the verse. He's going to read it. He's going to mention it again here. The two types. And one is the inaction yoga, usually associated with the forest in ancient India. That would be the ideal place to be inactive, because no one's going to disturb you in the forest. In the Christian tradition is the desert, the equivalent. So, but the action yoga is to act without attachment to the fruit. If you're really not attached to the fruit, then you'll always be, as long as you've done your duty, you'll be samatvam, balanced. The mind will be balanced. What does that mean? Neither happy, sad, happy, sad, happy, sad. Normally, we're attached to a fruit. If we get the fruit, happy. If we fail, sad. So attachment to the fruit, right, means success or failure, which means happy, sad, happy, sad. Krishna says that's the sign of a non-yogi. That's the sign of someone who in ignorance, who thinks I'm body-mind, and therefore uses life in the pursuit of desire. So that person is not samatvam. Equanimous is another term. He uses the term balance. And 50, likewise, what is yoga? Right? So 48 is balance of the mind, or equanimity, to be equal, success or failure. And 50, skill in work. And now what's the skill? Again, I know we discussed this, we're going over it again. It's not the skill in some physical sense of, get the techniques being technically accurate in the performance of work. It means to be skillful, to work without letting desire creep in and influence one's relationship with the work. That I am working because I will be able to fulfill some desires or avoid some aversions by my work. That's the skill. always keeping the Atman in mind. And so what should the yogi be thinking? This is my Dharma. I'm doing it my Dharma. With a successful failure is not in my control. I'm not going to latch onto that. I'm not going to use that as my criteria for action. I'm just going to make sure I do that, the specifics of that Dharma, to the best possible capacity that I have, in the best possible capacity that I have. So that's the skill, not letting desire creep in. Okay, so then Krishna, 4.1, back there. In the beginning, I spoke this, when he says discipline, it's actually yoga. I spoke this yoga, this discipline to Vivishwan, this karma yoga. Right? Vivishwan is the celestial being associated with the sun. Vivishwan spoke it to Manu, and Manu in turn spoke it to Ikshvaku. Manu actually is famous because Manu wrote the Dharma Sutras, the Dharma Shastras, the Manava Dharma Shastra, codes of Dharma. Anyway, the point here, Krishna is saying, I spoke this aeons ago at the beginning of creation, or at the beginning, ancient period of time. And then he says, well, and the saintly kings understood this discipline. The kings handed down this karma yoga. The other yoga was with the Brahmanas in the forest and the yogis. The yogis, a lot of them were Brahmanas. Actually, a lot of them were Kshatriyas, we know from their names in the Upanishads, but that's not the point. So, but the karma yoga is especially associated with kings, because kings have to maintain civic order and they have to make sure everybody performs their dharma. So it was of great interest to the kings. They couldn't run off and be yogis, because then the society would fall apart. So the saintly kings, the Raja Rishis, Rishi is a sage, Raja is a king, they understood this discipline, this karma yoga, through a line of succession. It was handed down. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu. Parampara is a term of a succession. Right? Teacher, king to king to king to king. Like the papal succession in the Vatican. But in the passing of time, the teaching became lost. Teachings of karma yoga. The other yoga remained. 2 yogas. One got lost, karma yoga. And then Krishna says in 3, because you're my devotee as well as my friend, I now declare this ancient discipline of yoga to you. So Krishna is presenting himself here as re-establishing the lost teachings of karma yoga. So make sure we're clear about that. And he says this is a supreme secret. I wouldn't call it a secret. I prefer to, it's not wrong, but I would prefer to translate it's intimate. It's an intimate knowledge. So now Arjuna gets puzzled by this, because he thinks Krishna's his cousin, right? The same age. And now Krishna's saying, I spoke this way back in primordial time, millions of years ago, actually. So this is the opportunity. The text is kind of like creating this opportunity for Krishna to reveal who he really is. So Arjuna says, how can I understand that you spoke these teachings in the beginning? Since your birth comes after the birth of Vivishwan, how could you have told Vivishwan in the beginning, you were born with me, right? Well, the traditional date is, 3,000, the war was 3,128 BCE, so Krishna was already an adult then, so they would have been born, 20, 30 years before that. You were born with me, says Arjuna, not millions of years ago, such that you could have spoken, taught this to Vivishwan. So now Krishna says, O Arjuna, scorcher of the enemy, both you and I have passed many births. I know them all, whereas you do not. Right? So Krishna is saying we've both had births, but different kinds of births. We'll find out. Arjuna's births are controlled by karma, but not Krishna's. So he's the transcendent Lord who comes whenever he wants to come. So he says, I know all my past births, and they're not real births. They're not births subject to karma. They're just Krishna intervenes. He appears to take birth in order to re-establish Dharma. Well, we'll find out. Let's just keep reading. Right? I know them all. So you do not. Why don't we remember our births? Because of tamas. Well, memories get covered by tamas. We can't even remember what we did. Get to my age, you can't remember what you did a week ago. So this is tamas. But Krishna is not subject to the gunas. Remember Ishvara and Patanjali, klesha, karma, not affected by the kleshas, by the conditions, by the laws, the conditions of Prakriti. So 6, even though I am unborn, don't take birth, I'm imperishable, eternal being. And I am the Lord of all beings. There we have it. Maheshwara. There we have Ishvara, Maha Ishvara. I'm the supreme Lord of all beings. So even though I'm unborn and I'm the supreme Ishvara, I'm not subject to any laws of Prakriti, but still I control my Prakriti. He translates this material energy. Prakriti. We know the word now because we've done a whole course of Hindu philosophy. I control my Prakriti. You see that? Unlike us, you and I, we are controlled by Prakriti. We didn't get to choose when we were going to be born, and in which family we were going to be born, and which country, and what time, in what period in human history. We're controlled by karma. Krishna says, I control, it's my Prakriti. This is my Prakriti. It's going to say that a lot more strongly later in the text. And I appear through the agency of my creative power. I appear when I want to, right? Hence the name Avatara. So, and when does Ishvara do that? Krishna do that? Verse 7, whenever there is a decline in Dharma, O descendant of Bharata, and an increase of adharma, whenever righteousness declines and unrighteousness increases, at that time I manifest myself. Then Ishvara enters into the realm known to us, the realm of Prakriti from his divine realm. And why? So continues, so for Dharma, to re-establish Dharma, for the protection of the good, verse 8, for the destruction of those who do evil, as well as to re-establish Dharma. Dharma needs to be re-established age after age, and the Puranas talk about, different Dharmas, different periods of different ages have different Dharmas, and always associated with an incarnation of Vishnu. So now Krishna says this in verse 9, O Arjuna, one who truly understands the divine nature of my birth, Daivim, what's the Sanskrit? Divyam, my divya, my divine birth, not like us, we took birth out of karma. One who understands the divine nature of my birth and activities, upon quitting this body, is not reborn into this world. This is a big change here. Up to now, to be free from reincarnation, you have to know the Atman and seek the Atman and perform yoga to experience the Atman. But now it's a different criteria. Krishna says, if you know me, to know something beyond the Atman, Bhagavan, right? Gita be clear, this is not the same as the Atman. There's three types. Krishna is the supreme, right? In verse 12, we'll read those verses together. So, one who understands the divine nature of my birth and activities. In the last class, we're going to read a little story about Krishna's activities, which would be an example of this, understanding the Leela. It's called Leela, the activities of Krishna. So we're going to finish the course with a nice little Leela of Krishna's activities. According to this verse, if we understand that, we gain liberation. So, taking shelter of me alone, this is bhakti now. The Atman is still there. All the rules of yoga still apply, giving up desire. But now, it's not so much, the focus is not so much just seeking the Atman, but surrendering. This is Ishvara Pranidhana of Patanjali. Taking shelter, right? So, upashritaha is the Sanskrit. To take ashraya, shelter of Krishna. So taking shelter of me alone, many in the past, whose passions, fears, and angers have been quieted by the austerity of knowledge, is yogi bhakti. Now, this is bhakti. But what is bhakti? Bhakti is, it has the element of surrendering to God. It still has the jnana, the jnana still is there. I'm not the body, mind. I'm an Atman. That's jnana. Still acting in the world without attachment to the fruit. That's still there, karma yoga. But now, in addition to those two major building blocks that the text has already established, that's why it starts up with jnana, then karma, then it ends up with bhakti. Now we're ready to understand bhakti, because bhakti takes those two building blocks of knowledge. I'm an Atman, not body, mind, number one. Number two, act in the world without desire. Takes those two, but now offers them, to God, and in a state of mind, which is not simply about seeking Atman, but surrendering to the highest being, Ishvara. So Krishna says here, many in the past who did this, taking shelter. So this ashritaha is exactly the same as pranidhana of Patanjali, right? That you can get samadhi by Ishvara pranidhana, surrendering to Ishvara. Verse 123. And also the first verse of the second chapter, Kriya Yoga, Ishvara pranidhana. And then in the niyamas, So, in the I don't know, what was it, 129 or something of Patanjali. So many in the past whose passions, fears, and angers have been quieted by the austerity of knowledge. Why is it austere? Because it's hard work keeping the mind fixed on the Atman. The mind wants to slide into a place of daydreaming and fantasy and thinking of desires and imagining some perfect situation with you're sitting on the beach with some beautiful person who wrote some romantic situation, right? We daydream. It's easy to slip into a place of daydream. So it's hard to keep the proper mindset. I am an Atman. There is a Bhagavan. It's a tapas. It's the tapas. It's a Jnana tapasa. Look at the Sanskrit. Don't be afraid of the Sanskrit. Go over the page. You've got the Sanskrit right there. You at least you can recognize the word tapasa by now. And they have attained to my nature. Now, what does that mean? My nature. Remember now, this is where Shankara and Ramanuja kick in. Right? They're writing their commentaries. Shankara's going to say, well, my nature means you merge into Brahman, and that's the end of it. You lose your individuality. At that point, there's no more Ishvara, there's no more Bhakti, there's no more anything. There's just infinite Brahman. And Ramanuja and the Vaishnavas are going to say, no. Narayana is the supreme being, and the soul attains the Vaikuntha, the divine realm of Vishnu, not a realm made of Prakriti, pure spiritual realm made of pure consciousness. Satchidananda. In Brahman with form and God with form and entourage and all of the liberated, devoted souls having these personal relationships with God in loving exchange. So that's what it means to have attained to my nature. These kinds of statements you have to plug into the Advaita versus Vishishta Advaita paradigm. I'm writing a commentary on the Gita. It's probably going to take me 3 or 4 years. And I'll be looking at 3 Advaita commentaries and 3 Vaishnava commentaries, so that we really get a sense of how these 2 major ways of, there's many ways you could divide things up. But one way is those traditions that just seek the Atman, some kind of infinite, eternal, non-personal experience, no more individuality. We can call them Advaita. Well, actually, the 3 I'm looking at are Advaita traditions. And the others are Vaishnava. No, the Atman is an individual, God is an individual, and Bhakti is eternal. So let me take a pause here. Well, we'll just read verse 11. O son of Pritha, in whatever way they approach me, I reward them accordingly. Elsewhere he's going to say, whatever you want. If you want to worship the celestials, I'll give you the faith for that. I'll strengthen your faith. Krishna's not a jealous God, like we might find in other traditions. There's no, I'm a jealous God, nothing like that. If you want to worship other gods, I'll even give you the intelligence for that. You want to seek the Atman, I'll give you the Atman. Remember, what does Ishvara do in Patanjali? Samadhi Siddhi, he'll give the Samadhi. So, but since everything is Bhagavan, he says, for in all respects, mankind follows my path. We'll jump to the end of the chapter, and then 101. And then we'll do some verses in 5 or 6, because I want to make sure we have plenty of time to do bhakti. So 34. By humble submission, this is the guru. Tadvidhi pranipatena. So, the guru is very central in Indian yoga traditions. By humble submission and intensive inquiry and service, you can know the truth. The self-realized, those who know the truth, who have seen this truth, can impart such knowledge to you. So the relationship is, the self-realized gives the knowledge to the student. What does the student do? Humble submission. You have to ask, you have to approach the guru, but it has to be humble, because if you're arrogant and you think you know everything, then you can't hear them. Then why approach a guru? Go and figure it out on your own. So one approaching a teacher, it's stressed greatly in the Indian traditions, humble submission and intense inquiry, serious inquiry. You can ask the guru anything. Nothing is taboo. There's nothing that one cannot ask a genuine guru. Humble submission, intensive inquiry, and service. Right, the teacher's giving knowledge, and you serve the guru. Of course, the guru should be living in ultra simplicity. So in the Vedic, in the Upanishads, it's samitpanihi. You bring firewood, so that the guru can, perform the sacred ceremonies or whatever. Anyway, so that's the relationship. This is the only verse in the Gita that speaks of the guru. And here is the relationship. Humble submission, intensive inquiry and service from the student, and the self-realized who has seen the truth can impart such knowledge to you, can give you the knowledge, and also set an example of what it means to live a yogic lifestyle. What does it mean to be free of desire? You observe the guru. How does the guru respond to situations where other people might get frustrated or angry? How does a genuine enlightened being respond? So you have to observe. So 35, O son of Pandu, when you have thus understood this truth, that is an Atman, that there's Bhagavan, two truths really, you shall no longer be subject to delusion. Right? Who am I? What's life all about? Why am I suffering? Why do things turn out the way they do? All of this kind of delusion. The yoga philosophy is very clear. You're an Atman. Everything that happens is karma. You're not a machine. You get to choose how you act. You can create fresh karma, or you can seek truth. If you don't seek truth, then you try to enjoy this body mind, then you're making more karma, and that will come back to you, and you come back and you take a future birth, reflecting the actions that you do in this birth. Quite clear. So when you've understood this truth, you shall no longer be subject to delusion. You will recognize that all beings are both in yourself, meaning we're all Atmans are the same. So as I am, so you are. So then we can have compassion and empathy. Discussed that already. And then me, ultimately, they're all being supported by Bhagavan, Ramanuja would say, and Shankar would say, ultimately, they are Brahman. There's no duality. So always keep in mind, Shankara's interpretation of these verses is going to be different from Ramanuja. This is a Vedanta text, remember. Vedanta, 3 texts, Upanishads, then the Vedanta Sutra written to clarify the Upanishads. We've done all this. And the third is the Gita. So even if you're the greatest of all sinners, doesn't matter. Once one commits oneself to yoga, then what happens? This boat of knowledge will allow you to transcend all evil. There's no one disqualified. No caste, no gender, certainly not in bhakti, but also in knowledge. Anyone can. Atman is not gendered or racially determined. It's beyond race, beyond gender, and it's at this deep level that all beings are equal. And not just humans, but animals. Even if you are the greatest, and read that. O Arjuna, 37. As fire burns kindling wood to ashes, so the fire of knowledge burns to ashes the results of all actions. So remember, if we act without desire, we said there's no reaction. It's true, there's no reaction in the sense of mundane reaction, but it actually, action without desire burns, because every action has some kind of a reaction, but this is not a normal reaction. It's not a reaction creating future births and karma. No, this acting without desire burns to ashes the results of all action. It burns whatever fruit would otherwise be generated. In this world, nothing purifies more than knowledge. So fire burns all of our karma. If you have bad karma, it gets burnt by intense yogic knowledge, maintaining, not just reading a book once in a while, but maintaining the teachings always in the mind. It's hard work. Remember, I said it's the tapas. It's Jnāna tapas. We read that verse. It is the knowledge tapas. Anyway. So, nothing purifies. One whose knowledge is perfected, verse 38 still, by yoga, realizes this truth. At the end of the day, it's about experiencing. Yoga sansiddhim. It's about actually vindati, finding it, not just believing it, not just reading about it, not just leading a yogic life and dying and hoping for the best after death. In this life, experiencing. 39. Intent upon truth and full of faith. You have to have faith to do anything, actually. Faith in that yogic path, but you have to have faith if you want to seek desires. You have to have faith that desire is going to make you happy. So it can't be... Faith simply means that you believe something's going to be... that something is going to produce an outcome, that's all. So whether it's yogic or mundane, everything is faith. Everything is... It's based on certain understanding. If I do this, I will attain a certain fruit. So the yogic journey, likewise. Full of faith, one who disciplines the senses acquires wisdom. Wisdom comes from control of the senses. And having acquired wisdom, knowledge of the self, knowledge of Bhagavan, quickly attains the supreme spiritual peace. But those who are ignorant, remember, ignorant, whenever it's used in these moksha traditions, it doesn't mean like, we might insult someone saying you're ignorant. What it means is it's ignorant of the self. It's this particular kind of ignoring the real self. So those who are ignorant, without faith, don't believe, I don't believe in the soul, I don't believe in Atman, I just believe, you live once and make the most of it, then you die, it's all over. So that without faith in it, and who are overcome by doubts, well, is there, isn't there? Remember Nyaya? How does philosophy really begin? Samshaya, doubt. Then you apply critical reasoning. Well, is it this or is it that? Is there an Atman or isn't there? But who are overcome by doubts, constantly doubting, they perish. Means they live their life, they die, and they lose the opportunity to become enlightened. And then they have to take all the karma in the next life. For the doubting soul, there is neither happiness neither in this world nor in the next, right? Forget about liberation or some next life. If you constantly are doubting, you're miserable in this world. You never know what to do. You're always, well, what if it's true? What if it's not? So constantly in a state of doubt, of just confusion, and that's not a nice state to be in. So therefore this life gets wasted if one is overwhelmed by doubt. Better make a decision one way or the other and go for it. 41. A conqueror of wealth. Action no longer binds one who is intent upon the soul. There's no more karma, right? Karma is only when you're intent on the body-mind and trying to satisfy the desires of the body-mind. If you're intent on the soul, no more karma. Whose fruitive actions have been renounced. Fruitive action means actions for some fruit, body-mind fruit. Desire for the Atman is fine, we've said that already. Whose fruitive actions have been renounced through yoga and whose doubts have been cut down by knowledge. So that's what Nyaya is going to set out to do, to remove doubt, study of the Vedanta, they in their own way, absorb the mind in the teachings, and slowly one becomes, one starts to realize their wisdom, realize their truths by deep study, by application of logic, by associating with other yogis. We haven't encountered that so much now, but in bhakti that's going to be a big thing. By all these ways, one's doubts become lessened and cut by knowledge. Okay? So therefore, with the sword of knowledge, cut down the ignorance that has arisen in your heart, this ignorance of the self. O descendant of Bharata, arise and take to the discipline of yoga. Use this human form of life for what is intended, rather than just waste it in the pursuit of useless and unsatisfying desires that never fulfill and simply generate more karma. So that's the conclusion of chapter 4. So we'll jump into chapter 5. So Arjuna, again, is confused. Remember, he was confused before. Do I act? Do I not act? He still hasn't got this idea that you should act and give up desire. He's still thinking of yoga as something that means renouncing the world, because, again, the action yoga had been lost, so this is the first time he's hearing this. All the yogis that he's known that come into the royal court in Hastinapur, the Brahmins come, Vyas comes into the court, and he's coming from the forest with his dreadlocks, and he's following the path of renunciation. So that's Arjuna's, that's his criteria for thinking of what yoga is. That's his role model. So again, he asked the same question. Now, Krishna, you've praised both the renunciation of action, right? There's all this knowledge business, as well as yoga. Remember yoga, 248, 250, keep checking. 248, balance of mind, equanimity, success, failure is irrelevant as long as I've done my duty. So that's balance. And skill in action. What's the skill? Making sure desire doesn't creep in. I know I'm repeating myself, but you'll be grateful when it comes to the quiz. So which is better, says Arjuna. 2, Krishna replies. Both renunciation and karma yoga lead to the highest good. Krishna doesn't deny inaction yoga will lead to the Atman. He's just saying that's not silly, not for Arjuna. They both lead to the Atman. But now look at this, is very clear. But of the two, karma yoga is better than the renunciation of action. It's better, it's safer, and the commentaries are going to say it's safer. And and you're also helping others, not just sitting in the forest seeking your own Atman. You're acting in the world without attachment, but your action in the world is contributing to the maintenance of society. So it's better. And then, but still, the rules are the same. Verse 3: one who neither hates nor desires. Again, the old raga dvesha. You have to act out of duty. Who is without duality. Same thing, success and failure, right? happiness, distress. Just act out of duty. That person is known to be ever renounced. Not someone who gives up the world, but someone who gives up, a renouncer. Right? Are we clear about this? Karma yoga means renouncing the desire, not the action. The other yoga is about renouncing action and everything, but not karma yoga. Karma yoga is just desire. So such a person, a great armed one, is easily freed from bondage. Well, it's easier to act in the world. Why, Krishna says, why suppress your natural inclination to act? Engage it in action, according to the propensity of the body-mind. Everyone has a Dharma, which reflects the functions in the world that best suits one particular disposition and physical makeup. 4. Only the immature speak of the distinction between Sankhya and Yoga, not the wise. Those who don't understand think, Sankhya, remember, is Jnana Yoga, and Yoga is Karma Yoga. Only immature, someone who is philosophically immature, thinks they're different, but not a wise person. By properly following either, a person attains the result of both. So he's accepting both. He can do either, even though he just said that Karma Yoga is better. 5. The position attained by the followers of Sankhya is also achieved by the followers of Yoga. One truly sees, who knows that Sankhya and Yoga are identical. One who recognizes that the same, that he sees, they both take to the Atman. You're seeing that the end result is the Atman. So the position obtained by, what's the position? The Atman, the grand finale goal. Obtained by the followers of Sankhya is also achieved, okay? 6. But renunciation without yoga discipline, O great armed one, is difficult to achieve. So without this, yoga discipline means giving up desire. That's the discipline. Acting for the sake of action, for Dharma. The silent sage who engages in yoga quickly reaches Brahman. The silent sage, acting in the world for the well-being of all other beings, no self-interest at all. That's the saint. It's a sadhu. One engaged in yoga, remember what yoga means? Karma yoga. Whenever there's just yoga by itself, it always means karma yoga. One engaged in yoga with mind purified. Still have to make the mind sattvic, which means make it not rajasic. And what is rajas? Desire, raga. You have to get rid of all the ragas, the desires. Who is self-controlled, control of the senses, and who has subdued the senses, where he spells it out. Whose soul has become the soul in all beings. What does that mean? Just all Atmans are the same. Of course, you know what Shankara is going to want that to mean. That ultimately everything merges into Brahman, so that would be that for Shankara. Ramanuja will have his separate take. He'll say, well, no, you don't merge into each other, but you're all the same. So in that sense, your soul is, you recognize, as I feel and as I am, so are all living beings. Even though performing action, someone with that kind of a, what he calls wisdom, that kind of a mindset, even though performing all actions is never bound. Bound means not generating any fruits. The learned person who is engaged in yoga thinks, what is a learned person doing this karma yoga? What is he thinking? I do nothing at all. The Atman does nothing at all. It's just the body-mind. Such a person knows that while seeing, hearing, right, these are all going to be functions of the senses, knowledge-acquiring senses, the organs of senses, organs of action. So such a person knows that while seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, going about with the organs of locomotion, sleeping, breathing, talking, eliminating, even going to the toilet, grasping and opening and closing the eyes, such a person thinks what? Only the senses are engaged with their objects. Atman is just like, remember the passenger in the chariot. One who acts without attachment. How many times has this been repeated? Well, I'll tell you how many times. Over 110 verses in the Gita says something about giving up attachment. 110 out of 750. One who acts without attachment, offering all actions to Brahman. Now there's a sense of offering. You're offering everything to Brahman. Okay, that could be, you could take a bhakti spin on that. You offer it to God, or just you're offering it in the quest of the Atman. That could go either way. Such a person is not tainted by evil. Evil meaning karmic reaction. As the lotus leaf is untouched by water, right? The lotus leaf sits on the water, but it's beautiful. But if the water falls on it, it's impermeable. Have you seen a lotus leaf? It's like waterproof. The water just rolls off. So that's the saint in the world. No karma touches, just rolls off. There's no karmic, because the saint has given up acting out of desire. Those who are yogis, verse 11, who perform all actions with the body, the mind, and the intellect, and the senses without attachment. You count for yourselves how many times this is repeated. 11, it's there. 10, it's there. Right? 7 is there. And so on. Just maybe changes the terminology a little bit. Without attachment. This is the teachings, the main teachings of the Gita. A person who is engaged in this way gives up the results of action. Gives them up. Not attached to them. Let them go. Whatever comes, comes. It's my karma. And attains peace. Then that's peace. Have I done my Dharma to the best of my ability? If so, then peace. But one who, not following this path, becomes attached to the results of action is bound by desire, right? If we don't follow the path of yoga, then what? Then we become obsessed with desires. We have these desires that cause us to act, and that we obey them. We strive to fulfill them. They become our masters. You could think of it that way. The Gita is going to present it that way. And we become bound. We're no longer free. We are bound to the desire. The desire controls us. And therefore, we are now slaves to the desire. And therefore, we're not happy until we fulfill the desire. And then what happens when we fulfill the desire? It's ungrateful master. Doesn't give us the satisfaction we thought it would. And even if it does, it's temporary. And then it immediately gets replaced by another desire. So we'll take a pause for a second there. So we'll see if we can finish up the chapter in more or less the allotted class time. Verse 13, mentally renouncing all actions. So in the mind, one's acting, but giving up not the actions, but the attachment to the fruits. The embodied one, right? The Atman sitting in the body, who is in control of the mind, dwells happily in the city of 9 gates. Okay, so we've got 2 eyes, you can add them up, all the holes in the body. While neither performing action nor causing any action to be performed. Remember, it's just sort of Prakriti. From one point of view, it's Prakriti acting within Prakriti, because the body is Prakriti, and it's acting in the world, which is Prakriti, and the mind is Prakriti. So it's really Prakriti acting in Prakriti. Of course, the soul is the agent, but that's from a different point of view. So 14, this Lord. Now, again, the commentators, some will say that that's actually God. You've got the footnote there. So Ramanuja and Shankara both take it to be the Atman itself, whereas Madhva, whose theism is much stronger, takes it to be God, because the term is actually Prabhu, the master. In any event, neither creates the means of action, the actions of the world, nor even the relationship between action and its results. Although the soul is an agent, so that this verse elsewhere, it's going to say it's an agent. So this can be a little confusing, the way this is framed. But I think the main point here, it's all karma. This is carried on automatically by the nature of matter. So cause and effect is a law of matter. And, action in the world, reaction, these are all laws of matter. This law does not accept the result of anyone's good or evil deeds. In this world, knowledge is covered by ignorance that bewilders the living entity. Again, we have a difference between Madhva and the other commentators. Who's the Lord? Madhva says it's God. Don't blame God for our actions. 16. The Supreme shines like the sun for those whose ignorance has been destroyed by knowledge of the soul. So that's sort of very common metaphor in mystical traditions. How do you try to describe the Atman, the pure soul, the nearest thing we have in our frame of reference in terms of luminosity and brilliance and something that reveals everything else is the sun. So that's a understandable metaphor. Those whose intellect, mind, and very foundation are focused on the Supreme, the yogis that have completely dedicated themselves to the pursuit of the Supreme, whose sins are dispelled by knowledge, because knowledge burns all past karma, never again return to this world. Once liberated, one does not come back. This is a beautiful verse. 18 coming up, especially in our modern moment of Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter movement. Look at this verse, 18. The wise see with equal vision. They see the same. They see what? A learned and gentle person, a Brahman, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and even an outcast. They see them all as equal, because they are equal as living entities, as Atmans, as consciousness underneath the race and the gender and even the species. There is the same life force within all beings. So if we can cultivate that kind of attitude, and clearly a wise person who sees that is not going to be a racist or a sexist, or we can add to the list speciesist, would not be killing animals, for example, to eat them. 19. Those whose minds are situated in serenity have overcome birth in this world. No more rebirth. Like Brahman, they are faultless and serene. They've become pure by dint of being completely absorbed in the pure, in their purest aspect of their own inner selves, the Atman. Consequently, they're situated in Brahman. Mind is situated in Brahman. One thus situated, verse 20, does not rejoice upon obtaining what is desired, with same verses in chapter 2, repeating it, right? If you're really impartial, just doing your duty, you're not going to think of things in terms of success and failure, or happiness and distress. You're going to be, just your happiness is going to come from the mind being absorbed in the self. And then whatever happens externally, as a result of one's performing one's duty, one's indifferent to that. Or at least one's equanimous is the word. Samatvam, samaha, equals. Cognate with the English word same. Same and samaha are Indo-European cognates. So one situated thus does not rejoice upon obtaining what is desired, nor does such a person lament upon receiving what is undesired. With intelligence fixed and without bewildered, or remember all the time when it's talking about intelligence fixed, what's it fixed on? The goal of the Atman. The knower of Brahman becomes established in Brahman. The mind's fixed in Brahman. So to all intents and purposes, it becomes Brahman. One whose mind is unattached to external objects, who finds happiness within. This is the point. It's not that the yogi doesn't have happiness. We think, if you give up desires, and how will you be happy? What's going to be the source of one's bliss? Well, this is it. Happiness within. Far greater happiness that's not temporary. It doesn't come and go. It's not just a sensual moment or a dodgy emotional feeling. Dodgy meaning the object of your affection could disappear at any time. So, O son of Kunti, those pleasures that arise from contact of the senses with their objects, right? Sense indulgence, taste, sound, whatever it is, the contact of a sense with a sense object that creates pleasure, creates a pleasurable vritti in the mind. They're sources of misery. Now, why would he say that? Because they have a beginning and an end. Adyantavanta kunte anate shuramate buddha. A wise person does not take pleasure in something that has a beginning and an end. Why would you seek something that has a beginning and an end if you can find something that is eternal, which the yogis will claim is the case with the Atman. So obtaining the Atman, that happiness is eternal. So, 25, before leaving this body, in other words, one has to work at this at life. It's not going to magically happen at death. So before leaving this body, one who is able to tolerate the urges, right? These urges that come from desire and anger, these are waves that arise in the mind. We desire something, or we get angry, just like a wave that takes over the mind. One can tolerate that in life, is a disciplined person and is happy in this world. So not just one gets liberated, but becomes peaceful and happy in this world if one can control desire and anger. Verse 24, a yogi whose happiness is within, not without, not dependent on external things, right? Which one has, how much control do we have over external things? They come and go. We have no control over them. With some little control we think we have, but in a moment they could be taken away. Any object of the sense, including a relationship, including our own beloved family members. A yogi whose happiness is within, whose enjoyment is within, who is illuminated within, stressing the point, happiness lies within, as every mystic tradition of the world has always claimed. Who is absorbed in Brahman attains a liberation in Brahman. We attain whatever state of mind we're absorbed in. Krishna is going to say that specifically later on in the text. Yam yam vapi smaram bhavam tyajati ante kalivaram tam tame vitaro jana. Whatever state you think of at the time of death, that's where you go in accordance with karma and, of course, other principles. 25. Seers whose sins are destroyed, whose doubts are removed. Sins are destroyed by how? By the fire of knowledge, by the work of keeping the Atman in the mind all the time. That's kind of tapas. It's a kind of intense mental activity. That intensity burns karma. That's one way, of course. There's other ways. The bhakti, we haven't really got to bhakti yet. So Krishna's still laying down the framework that we're Atman, that we can act in the world. We don't have to go to the forest. But the main principle, threading all the way from the very beginning of chapter where we started this into 211, is this idea that it's desire that binds us. Because we desire something, we're bound to that object. It's not difficult to understand. And if we keep desiring, our whole life is just based on the pursuit of desire, we're constantly bound by all these things, and at death, all those bonds, many of which we haven't fulfilled, many of which we didn't get around to fulfilling or didn't fit into this life, they drag us back along with all the reactions. That's the law of karma. So, whose doubts are removed, who are self-controlled, right? Now, repeated again and again and again and again. Yoga is discipline. It's hard work. Who rejoice in the welfare of all beings. So, a real saintly person sees the Atman in all beings and understands, as I suffer, as I would suffer in this, that, or the other situation. Hence, I understand the suffering of others. That's empathy. From that comes compassion. But it starts with being able to see the sameness. Because we don't feel compassion, for example, for a stone, because there's no sameness, there's no life force there, so we don't feel. But the more we're able to see the sameness with other beings, that's kind of attitude gets us beyond racism, beyond sexism, beyond speciesism, to a place of equality. We really, we're all seeking equality, but Gita will say you have to go down to this deep level place to find that equality. Once you find it there, then you're able to see genuinely, not just because of political correctness, but you genuinely see the sameness in all other beings, including animals. Okay, so that's something to think about. Now we're thinking about race and gender. So the next thing is perhaps to think about, well, okay, we've made these great strides and forced ourselves and to see to see equality where perhaps our predecessors and ancestors did not. What's next on the list? Right, we're already beginning to think about what the great apes. So we said, okay, to kill a great ape because it's so 99 point whatever chromosomes are the same. We'll keep going down that road. And anything that suffers, right? And the Jains would say, just observe that the animals, don't you see, they suffer, and they cry when we cry. They're affectionate in situations when we're affectionate. Why do we imagine they don't suffer? And if they do, why would a saintly person, a sattvic person, a yogi, or even just a normal dharmic person, why would a dharmic person wish to inflict suffering on another being? Just because the body is different. Right? Because that's the same attitude our forefathers had with race and sex. That women are inferior, different races are inferior. That was an attitude that pervades human history. So we're trying to rise above that now. So yoga is going to encourage us to keep going. With animals are next on the list of things to recognize commonality and common beingness, not humanness, but beingness. They also are sentient beings. 26. For the self-realized sage, who is free from desire and anger, whose thoughts are controlled, liberation to Brahman is close at hand. So liberation is really nothing mystical or magical or esoteric. You don't have to climb up some mountain in the Himalayas. It's giving up the desire right here in our own minds. So 27, 28 now, chapter 6, by the way, next chapter is going to be Patanjalian chapter, the inactive yoga. Remember, Krishna's really prioritizing the action yoga, or even says it's higher, but he doesn't reject the other yoga. So the next chapter is going to be inaction yoga, and we see a little bit of that inaction. You might recognize Patanjali here in 27, 28, shutting out external objects. Patanjali we call that pratyahara, fixing the vision between the eyebrows. right? Because if you keep your eyes open, you get distracted. If you keep them shut, you fall asleep. So you kind of keep them unfocused between the eyebrows. Or this could be, anyway, tip of the nose or tip of the eyebrows. Balancing the incoming and outgoing breath. Pranayama, right? Patanjali calls it. Shvasa, prashvasa, something, control of the breath. Dirga sukshma is the control. Gati vichedaha, Patanjali will say. Here it is. The silent sage, whose senses, mind and intelligence are controlled. How many times has he said that? Count it. Who is intent on liberation, that becomes the goal of life, not some temporary thing, the pursuit of pleasure or relationships, which are all temporary. Nothing wrong. It's not, but the yogi seeks something beyond that. And who has given up desire. Right. When I told you that I had a student counted how many verses, I wasn't kidding. How many verses say give up desire? 110. That is 700, approximately 750. Last verse. The one who knows me. Now all of a sudden Krishna, and that's another thing, by the way. Out of 18 chapters, I think 13, even if they've not been talking about bhakti, there's not been strong bhakti yet. Bhakti's going to come. Even so, 13 out of 18 chapters end with a bhakti message, something about me, I am the supreme, I am the one that, you surrender to me. So here is an example of that. This has been about the Atman, not about Krishna or Ishvara, but still, this is the Gita is ultimately about prioritizing, about bhakti. The one who knows me to be the recipients of all sacrifice and austerities. Right? Vedic sacrifice, if you're going to do those, then do them for Ishvara. If you're going to do tapas, do it for Ishvara. As the great Lord, Maheshvara, Sarvaloka Maheshwaram of the world, and as the friend of all beings. So now the focus is shifted from just knowing the Atman to knowing something higher beyond the Atman. That's Bhagavan. We're going to get a lot more of that focus on Bhagavan as we proceed. Okay, so we finished 5 chapters. We pick up next lecture on chapter 6. We'll look at the Patanjali and yoga, and then bang, the rest of the text, we're going to focus on bhakti.